Aku. Renti. Hooray.
So I've been playing a bit of the Age of Empires 4 stress test beta, and I found the gameplay to be pretty fun, but everything else is kinda bad. Mostly, I feel like this is going to be a really fun RTS, but I'm cautiously optimistic. It's being developed by Relic, which is the studio responsible for the god-awful Warhammer 40,000 Dawn of War 3, a game that should have been a really fun hybrid using the best elements of Relic's previous entries, specifically the base-building aspect of Dawn of War 1 mixed with the RPG elements of Dawn of War 2, and instead we got some strange hybrid RTS MOBA that no one really liked. I'm pleased to say that this is not the case with Age of Empires 4. They took the good ideas from 2 and 3 and made something very streamlined yet still very fun to play. Now, Age of Empires 2 is a game beloved by many, and Age of Empires 3 has its fans, but personally I feel their biggest weaknesses was always the pacing. Age of Empires 2 just has a significant amount of repetition that was slowly ironed out with releases like the Definitive Edition and subsequent updates. And Age of Empires 3 is just slow in general because that's how it always was in that 3D engine where there was always this extra wind-up time for unit animations, and things like positioning were a bit more important, so things were just a tad slower overall. The pacing is not an issue for this game at all, and matches are often quicker, although as game modes and playstyles are added, I feel that this game will strike a balance between fast-paced games for ranked and casual multiplayer play, in addition to those night-to-morning kind of games you play with your friends. In terms of mechanics, this game, like I said, borrows inspiration from the previous two titles. Markets have returned, and they make a lot more sense now. Basically, what you can do is you can trade with not only your allies, but if you're playing a one-on-one kind of game, or a free-for-all kind of game where there are no alliances, your trade cogs and carts won't be useless anymore. They can actually trade with neutral points on the map. These are unallied positions. These are neutral cities that you can basically port into and trade like normal. So the idea is you can have this little bit of gold income, and you don't have to ally a defeated enemy and trade with their derelict market. You know, that never made sense to me. It was cool to do back in the day, but now you can do that with points on the map, so that means if you're doing a 1v1, you can do that. And this allows for skirmishing in the mid-game. So if you want to, say, instead of taking a bunch of resource points and expanding out, let's say you just want to focus on building an army to protect a trade line. Well, you can do that now. It's obviously more safer to do a trade line within your own base with an ally, but this is nice for those 1v1 kind of games where you don't have that option, and it adds more to the mid-game. There's still the Wonder objective, but also new to the game are holy sites. So monk-type units still have a purpose. In fact, for the Holy Roman Empire, one of the features they have is that they can make monks early in the Dark Age, and these monks can come out, and they're called prelates, and they not only heal, but they can also buff villagers, and they can be upgraded later on to give your units, like military units, fighting spirit buffs. It's pretty cool. They can actually do more damage. If you're worried about the game being faster now, that does not mean they have removed defensive structures like they did in Age of Empires 3, which was a really bad decision when that happened. It really changed how Age of Empires was perceived. It went from this really cool base-building game to more of a unit management type game. Age of Empires 3 did not utilize many defensive structures. There were forts and watchtowers, and I believe wooden gates and barricades for wall-off, but there just wasn't an emphasis on it. This time around you have many more options. It kind of reminds me of Stronghold with abilities like burning oil. They've also combined the more useless outpost building from Age of Empires 2 with the watchtowers of that game. So you have these things that are built as outposts, so they have this big line of sight, and then they can be upgraded into full-on towers, and these towers can have arrows, they can have cannons attached to them, which is really nice. They've also done some more things to the walls, and they've taken inspiration from Definitive Edition, Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition here. This time they have not only stone walls and stone gates, but they also have wooden gates and walls, and then you can also build these towers within those walls, and those can act as line of sight and they can also utilize offensive capabilities, which is really cool. I really wish you could garrison units on top of them, or, on the walls. Mechanically, I feel like they've really taken a lesson not just from previous titles, but also their respective definitive editions, and they've done something here to make it potentially really fun and interesting. The foundation is here, but there are a lot of problems, and we'll get into that now. Balancing is sort of bad right now. I feel like the English can have some unfair territory advantage. What they can do is they can fast expand out with a giant stone wall, and then they can place longbowmen behind the walls, and they'll have insane range to hit things like areas near critical resource locations. English can also drop a castle structure when aging up at one point, similar to how you can build a building to age up in Age of Empires 3, which can be a bit frustrating if it's built right in your territory. I've seen some people quit flat out from having that happen. Now, I haven't played a ton of this title, so the meta might change over time, but I feel that this game, provided it gets the balancing it needs that the developers have promised, we will see a nice mix of casual and competitive communities, but that's going to depend on a large amount of factors and how big of a net Microsoft and Relic want to cast in terms of not only marketing, but also good first impressions, which means you have to have several key things to keep the casuals interested to get that competitive community, because eventually, you want to get as many people as possible. They start out casual, then you incentivize them to keep playing, they want to get better at the game, they become competitive, and now you've got a competitive community and a casual community, and you got to balance those two. But you have to get the casuals in first, and you need to have a good ladder system to help separate players based on a skill set. You need to have a variety of maps and modes to help them get into multiplayer. Unique game modes really help with that. Seasonal alternative modes and maps help keep casuals in because they'll keep locking on, they'll keep trying it out, and then, once they're a little bit more confident with their playstyle, they're like, oh, okay, I'm done with the gimmick maps, let's try some competitive ones. And they'll go for that, and that'll keep the ladder healthy. In addition to healthy amounts of launch content, the game needs to have a good aesthetic to catch the eye to begin with. And as of right now, I find the game extremely lacking right now in all of these aspects, especially the aesthetic. Now, it's important to note, as the game will obnoxiously remind you with this stupid Windows XP screensaver message, this is all pre-release, this is a test. Which, by the way, when the game is coming out next month, it tells me one of two things. Either the visuals right now are set in stone and it's going to look just like this at launch, or we're playing an older, more stable build with the graphics options locked to a lower setting internally to allow more people to play and stress test their network infrastructure. And I really hope that's the case, because the graphics, at even the highest settings, are totally hideous. In fact, I don't even notice a difference. I'm thinking that internally they are locked, but Microsoft hasn't told anyone about that. And that can throw a lot of people off because they're clicking the high settings and they're going to be like, this looks like garbage. Texture resolution is really poor. The shadows are non-existent. I find it just to be extremely lacking visually. And the aesthetic is not very good. It's just not. Go back and look at Age of Empires 2 and its definitive edition release, and you'll see what I'm talking about. From a distance, the models in that game are easily identifiable. Here, everything just blobs together. Prelates look like villagers until you zoom in or you take a second. When you're playing Age 2, you can just spot a pikeman, that's a pikeman. You spot a that's a villager. You spot a monk, that's a monk. Here, monk looks like the prelates, monks. Here, the prelates, or the monks, or whatever, look like villagers at a first glance. The game pales in comparison in terms of options and accessibility compared to Age of Empires 2 Definitive. I don't even think there are options for colorblind people in these menus. Just barely anything except for rebindable keys and a couple other things. I'm also concerned about the game's launch. There's a good chance that if they're disabling all these graphics options, they might just be having problems getting the game to work properly for a lot of systems. This is all purely speculation, of course, but with Microsoft's previous track record of games launching, and everything just points towards Age of Empires 4 being a buggy and unoptimized game, or one with a very small amount of content, or both, possibly at launch. It's not like it's just, it's the Gears of War team is releasing buggy games, or it's the Halo team. No, it's
It's all of them, and it's also Age of Empires. Age of Empires 2, Definitive Edition, buggy at launch. Age of Empires 3, Definitive, are you kidding me? That game was broken. It was awful. And I just have a feeling that Age of Empires 4 is either going to be lacking content, or it's going to be buggy and unoptimized. I could be wrong on all of this. This is, again, pure speculation, but that's my impression from it so far. Continuing on with content, Age of Empires 2 and 3, even before their expansions, had many civilizations and modes at launch, and yes, while in Age of Empires 2 many of the factions were very similar, they at least went for a quantity factor where they would make different archetypes for the visual aspect for each civilization set, and they would also make use of all their civilizations and time periods to make something distinct for the campaign. So an example of archetypes would be like, okay, you have the Persians and the Saracens, they all shared one type of aesthetic. There would be an archetype of aesthetic. There was still a distinction, and of course Definitive improved upon that. The expansions added more content, more units. They're just launching with a small amount of factions with some tiny distinctions.
So they're not quite going the quantity route here. They're going for a smaller amount of factions at launch, but the problem with that is that they're not going quantity or quality necessarily. Upgrades are different, some special units, some special buildings, but they're not quite going, crazy quality, super hyper detailed factions like StarCraft 2 or Warcraft 3. And they're not going quantity either, so they're trying to shoot for an in-between, but I don't feel like this is going to work out for them very well, because people have this expectation when it comes to Age of Empires, and I want to judge the game as an RTS based on its own merits, and for the most part, when you look at mechanics, it's fine, but when you look at content, feature set, this doesn't seem like the fourth game in a franchise. This seems like the first one. It's a game with a lot to live up to, and I can tell immediately it's not going to live up to most of that at all. And the factions having such a small amount at launch and having them not be super unique or game-changing, okay, I can see as a number, some people complaining, and they'll be like, oh, there's not 30 factions at launch like Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition. I can understand that, but, then at that point they should, look at the game and judge it for themselves. Oh, okay, well, there's not 30 million factions, but guess what? It's got 5 or 4 really, really distinct and good ones. Each one feels like a totally different game, like Warcraft 3 or StarCraft 2, but they don't. They don't feel that different from each other. There's differences, but they are not that different to justify this tiny amount of content out of the box at launch. And of course, we are getting DLC, but we got to think of this at launch. And I'm just not seeing all of this stuff. I'm just not seeing it. I'm not seeing a good reason to buy this game at launch. And that is just awful for setting up a player base, because you expect it to be huge at launch, and it probably will be, but if it just collapses off because your excuse is, well, it's coming in the form of DLC, well, what does that tell the loyal customers who are going to buy it day one? Huh? You should have bought it later. Well, if we didn't support it, you wouldn't make DLC for it, like Dawn of War 3, which is another Relic game, huh? They did a bunch of stupid shit in that game, and then people who played it were like, oh, this is garbage, I don't want to play this anymore. And so they dropped off it. And then apparently they fixed some of the problems, and the drop-off was so bad that they decided, oh, we're not going to support it anyway. Fuck you. That was Relic. That was basically Relic. And they're making this. And you can say that was Sega, that was THQ, that was whoever as a publisher, but Microsoft can be just like that. Oh, we're going to drop it. You know what? No. Not going to support it anymore. That pretty much leaves just the campaign. I have absolutely no impressions how good it'll be. Will it be highly scripted? Will it be a lot more open in terms of how you approach each map and objective? How about the story? Will it be character-driven like Age of Empires 3 with lots of dialogue and cutscenes? Or will they make it a bit more hands-off like Age of Empires 2, where cutscenes are shown before and after a game with some dialogue sprinkled in, some scripted sequences in between? How about the voice acting? The only bit we have is from the tutorial, which is included in its no William Wallace learning campaign, I can tell you that. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for my thoughts. Overall, it sounds like I hate the game. I don't. I think that there is something really fun underneath here, and I'm hoping that about 50 to 60% of these issues, mainly technical
graphical and certain modes are just, unlocked in the full game. Like, we're gonna play the full game. It's like, oh, it's actually optimized fine. It looks good. It's got a healthy amount of maps and modes. The maps right now are just really limited. It's like 5 maps. There's no alternate game modes. It's just the same ones. And right now, I'm just cautiously optimistic. I'm not going to pre-order this game. I'm going to request a review code, but I'm probably not going to buy it until I know for sure if I'm going to like it, because $60 on an RTS that hasn't, a franchise that has only resurfaced recently and hasn't had a new game in ages. The only thing we've gotten new is expansion content for Definitive Edition 2 and 3. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I'm just kind of disappointed. It looks fun, believe me, but knowing Microsoft is probably going to be a buggy piece of shit at launch. I hope it's not. I really hope it's not, because I want to have another RTS. I want to have a resurgence of RTS, just like retro FPS have kind of had a resurgence lately, and I want that same thing, but for RTS. I want the big box RTS games to come out. The whole reason I got into PC gaming. I want that to come back. And I don't know if it's going to happen. This game might make or break that. Well, at least we can play Age of Empires 2 for another 2 decades, huh? Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. I'm out.
Be ready for intended.
Harken it all! Be on guard to haste it!
Servant.